Recording in progress.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Asia Society Hong Kong's Women Leadership Series, Womenomics, the Advancement of Economics, ? And I want to thank Women in Finance Asia for partnering with Asia Society Hong Kong for this program. I am speaking to you from quarantine. This is day 7, and I still have another 2 weeks to go, so I can join I'm looking forward to joining everybody in person when I'm out of quarantine, but we're really delighted that this afternoon we have a distinguished panel to talk about this really important topic that, it's going to be with us for a long time. And the mission of this series, of this Women Leadership Series, is really to talk about enhancing diversity and inclusion, which is a necessary component for us to accomplish collectively. And it is to inspire what is possible when female and male role models can work together to a better future and not just settle for the status quo. For preparation for this talk, for this opening remark, I looked up some interesting numbers. I've been watching the news, I'm sure all of you have, with the new Japanese Prime Minister that was announced. And I was just curious how many women in his cabinet. When Womenomics was announced by Abe, I believe at that time there was 1 woman in his cabinet. Things have improved. There are 3 of 20 cabinet members this time. And also women have accounted 37% of new recruits into the Japanese government joining in April 1st, which is actually a quite not a bad number considering they were expecting 35%. So there has been progress. We look at the German Prime Minister stepping down after 16 years, Angela Merkel. She certainly has been a very capable women leader. But then where are the pipelines of women leaders to replace her? I think one of the numbers that we have seen from this talk, 10% of world CEOs are women. Then what? What are some of the progress that we're going to be made, hopefully, in the coming decades? I'm really interested in some of these topics because I look at my 8-year-old niece, who just celebrated her birthday. What will be her world be like in a decade or 2 when she get into college and enter adulthood? What would her world be like for her as a young woman? So some of these issues we're going to be addressing today, and I'm really delighted that Adrian Warr, CEO, Hong Kong and Taiwan and Market Growth, Thailand for Edelman, is on the panel. Lena Wong, founder and executive director, Hong Kong Momtrepreneurs, co-founder of Womenters, is with us. And Maaike Steinebach, general manager of Hong Kong and Macau Visa, and Bénédicte Nolens, who is going to be our moderator, head of the BIS Innovation Hub, Hong Kong Center. And I'm really delighted the 4 of them can kind of join us today to delve into this really interesting topic. So I'm going to hand it over to Bénédicte to get the program started. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, panelists, for being here and sharing the stage today. So I will start off with a warm-up question. They're always useful to get the panel going. So if we could go, starting from here, about what made you passionate about this topic, i.e. to try and advocate for specifically women in the workplace. What drove you to do that and in what context? And feel free to give some thoughts on how it connects with your current position.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bénédicte. Very delighted to be here, and thank you, Asia Society, for organizing this series. For me, my eye-opening moment came when I was sitting in the ICC in the corner office, and I just turned 40, and I realized how incredibly lucky I was to have had a very limited glass ceiling in my career. I'd had a lot of support from my family, my friend, my spouse, my bosses, male bosses in particular, to kind of bring me where I was today. And I really started to realize that it was time to pay it forward. So I started mentoring and sponsoring women, but I quickly realized that actually there's a lot of work that we can do, but in order to really scale and become more impactful, needed to grow this a little bit bigger. So started originally with the TWF, which is an amazing organization, the Women's Foundation that is working to empower women in Hong Kong. But then started organizing events with women chief executives in Hong Kong in financial services to really ensure that there are more female participation in financial services. And that has expanded a little bit more beyond financial services into fintech today with the founding of Women in Tech. I feel very passionate about that because I feel that, you know, an inclusive society is what is really necessary for economies to grow and to thrive. So I'm very passionate about the Womenomics initiative because at Visa, we also believe that actually in order for economies and communities to thrive, we need to be inclusive and make our own network accessible to everybody. So I'm very fortunate to be able to drive the agenda around D&I in my own organization today, not just around the participation of women, but also around all aspects of diversity, increasingly around cognitive diversity, so finding different mindsets and people that think differently and bringing them into the organization, particularly to help drive some of the change and innovation that is happening. So I'll stop there because I could go on for hours. Don't want to hoard the mic.
Great. Lena?
So thank you, Bénédicte, and thank you, Asia Society, for having me here. I think my life-changing moment is 7 or 8 years ago when I changed my career goal and became a mother. I was a full-time mom for 4 years, and that was quite a change in terms of my lifestyle. But then fast-track 4 years, although it was such a blessing to be there with the girls when they were young, I still love working. I miss the momentum and the stimulation at the workplace, and I want to go back to work. And I have to confess, I shy away from my old career in finance because at that time I thought it would be close to impossible for me to find a job in finance again. Then I decided to start my own business and wanted to look for support group for moms to start business. And that's the start of the organization Hong Kong Momtrepreneurs, where I want to promote and empower more mothers to start business. Because in Hong Kong, it's extremely hard to really try to keep both having, you know, a great career, but then building a family and really have the time to spend time with the children when they're young. And at that time, I believe that it would be much easier to strike a balance to have your own business, so that, you know, the time and everything is all in your hand and it's easier to manage. But then, of course, for those of you who have a business would know that it's not easy to have a startup. Nevertheless, I think COVID actually also changed the situation since last year, as many companies, despite the size of the companies, are all forced to provide the flexibilities or come to realize the possibilities of having providing flexibilities to their employees. And so starting this year, I co-founded a company called Womenomics with my co-founder to help companies to retain female talent, as we believe that companies should realize that they can provide more flexibilities to their employees, hence be able to let them continue having, you know, building their family or continue having their life while, you know, working hard for the company. So that's a bit of, you know, a shift for me from being, you know, in finance to all the way having an NGO, and then now, of course, running other business as well. So that's a bit for me.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. So I'm relatively new to the area of gender equality and certainly don't have the experience or contribution that you guys do. I got involved around about 5 years ago with a combination of personal and professional factors just making it kind of interesting at the same time, very real reasons, and then just being in the right place at the right time with the Women's Foundation. So on a personal level, it was going through the process of adoption here in Hong Kong with my wife that just highlighted a bunch of massive systemic unfairnesses that made both of us just a bit angry. Not directed at anyone particular in Hong Kong, and social services are doing an incredibly good job, but there were just some parts of the system that just were a bit unfair and that really drew into relief the unfair choices and specifically the inflexibility for my wife. It was just you giving up work and that's it. There weren't really options. At the same time, I took over a business here in Hong Kong, which is around about 97% female at entry level, and was at the time around about 97% male at management level, which, apart from just being hideously unfair, is dreadful business sense. I mean, that's a lot of talent that you're losing throughout the pyramid. So there was a very strong commercial reason to want to do something about it. And just by sheer luck, was introduced to the Women's Foundation as well at a time when they were looking at putting together an initiative to try and address this, to get men involved in the topic, and that very much struck a chord with me. I come from a family where my mum was the main wage earner, obviously working in a female-dominated industry. And on a personal level, my wife has had a career all through her life and has had to pretty much disrupt that for us to be able to have the kids. So all of those factors came together at the right time with an opportunity to go and do something, and that's why I stay involved and have got involved with the Male Allies, and we've been doing that for about the last 4 or so years.
Great. That's really interesting in many ways, because even for me, I started my involvement in Women in Finance around something like probably 12 years ago. So it seems like for all of us, it didn't actually start on day one, right? There seems a point where we either realized that we needed to give back, as you said, Maaike, or where, as happened to you, Lena, you left the workforce. I can guarantee to you, I struggled and held on through 2 kids to my job, but it was a very, very tough task. Yeah. And the more senior you are, counterintuitively, the worse it gets. So by the time of my second child, I was MD. And to be frank, it was not a very friendly environment for actually the reason that you said, Adrian, which is that the top of the pyramid tends to not have had to carry those kids. So in my case, there was a real lack of understanding as to what stages a woman goes through, 9 months pregnant and then 9 months deep pregnant, so to say, and then start that all over again. We'll come to these topics a bit later. So, Maaike, since we're talking about women economics, it can mean a lot of things, but I think you mentioned in specific that you see a huge opportunity in serving the female segment of society, including in finance. So I thought it would be great if you can elaborate on that thought, because that's probably the closest immediate and demonstrable connection to economics.
Yeah, sure. So I think the women economics actually strives to increase the participation of women in the workforce and actually drive economic growth and GDP growth through that initiative. And I think I was just looking at it, but the McKinsey Global Institute actually said that closing the gender gap in the workforce could actually add a staggering 28 trillion to the global GDP. So I think if you just let that sink in, if we would actually see an opportunity in actually creating more diversity and inclusion, and not just from a gender perspective, but making our businesses, our corporates, our communities, our networks more inclusive, it's actually going to help us drive more business and better business performers. And I don't think we have to go into that in detail, because there's a lot of research out there that says that companies that have diverse boards and diverse leadership team actually perform better. But that's why we should also look at the massive opportunity that is out there. And the opportunities that we are seeing is really also focusing on women as a consumer, as an investor, as a user of products. So women are increasingly growing older. Women continue to outlive men, but also women continue to become more financially independent and making their own money or becoming their own business owners. So if you combine that actually with women that are most likely going to outlive their partner, that means on the one hand, they are going to live longer, they're going to be richer, they're also going to inherit more, which means actually they're going to have quite a lot of spending power. And apart from the fact that it's just a moral obligation to include female participation in the economy, there's actually a real opportunity here to focus on women as consumers and as an opportunity to generate business. But there are some caveats there, and I think Adrian probably can share some of his experiences from advertising and the way the female consumer is approached, because I don't think everybody necessarily has yet picked up on the fact that that is really a fantastic opportunity to pursue. So I like flipping the conversation from something that is negative or not solvable into what are actually the opportunities if we bring more women into our economies.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of build on it, because I think you raise a good point, and one that's a hobby horse of mine, so I'll try not to rant. But I think, specifically the advertising and marketing industries, I think it has been historically an imbalance at the top of those businesses, and especially in key decision-making areas that have made them historically male-dominated industries. And we're all very familiar with the stereotypes of advertising largely being driven by sex, and it's stick a beautiful woman on a product has been for many, many years the very, very stupid solution to a lot of advertising challenges. Obviously, there's a massive evolution. But I do still think that there is a lack of cognitive diversity with the industry that's allowing male-dominated ways of thinking to address a way of targeting the female dollar. And you'll still see the female dollar, I think, being approached in some really basic ways of take the product, make it pink, and charge a small markup for it, and now we can market it to women. That kind of approach I just think is offensive and stupid. And I think, we are, as an industry, getting much, much better at trying to drive, I think, more conscious consumerism. And I think there's a huge opportunity to approach marketing to women in that respect, in that it's not just about selling the nice things that we like to buy, the luxuries in life, but actually sensible marketing for women who control many of the really important financial decisions within family units, who can improve levels of saving, who can manage debt, who can do all sorts of great things for health and wellness, for education. This is a massive target area where we can make money and make the world a better place. And I'd love to see our industry stepping into doing that more, but I honestly think we're hampered by the fact that we're still male-dominated at a very senior level, and therefore we're just lacking some of the cognitive diversity. I don't think, by the way, that this is a cabal of evil men stroking their beards and thinking, how do we lock women out of this? I genuinely think it's a lack of cognitive diversity. I think we haven't got, we're in creative industries, and creative industries are based on an ability to connect bits of information in your head and therefore come up with new things. What's available in my head is the recipe that I have for being creative, and that's going to be based on my experiences, and my experiences are based on being a man. That just means I can't come up with the similar connectivity that I would have if I have more women in the room as well. So that diversity of thinking, it's not an evil plan by men necessarily, it's just a flaw in lacking the ingredients that you need for proper creativity.
And just to add to that, it's very interesting that also some of our research shows that women are key decision makers on household spending, of course, daily goods, but also kind of healthcare decisions, what kind of insurance, what kind of vitamins, how are we going to spend our medical bills. So they do a lot of research on healthcare and well-being. Particularly older women really want to grow old gracefully, so are willing to spend on their well-being, fitness, vitamins, etc. But the reality is that they also make key decisions in areas that you don't necessarily expect it. So a majority of decisions about what car a family is going to drive is actually taken by the woman and not by the men. So it makes a lot of sense for the car industry to start focusing, for example, on how to target women, as just as one example.
And it's another great example. So I don't know if you've read, I'm sure you have, but I don't know if everyone at home would have read a book called Invisible Women, which is incredible, and it's about how the design and product development industries, or large parts of it, about how the product development industries are male-dominated and therefore have excluded women's thinking. And examples such as the seatbelt in cars, or just the way that cars are done, they're designed for men, almost exclusively designed for men. And so these are areas where you've got female decision-makers controlling the dollars, but the product design is completely masculine. So it's a really interesting, weird gap.
Maybe to pick up on this thinking of yours, I agree that definitely marketing, specifically, frankly, in the financial sector, is not at all targeted at women. So I've been earning money for 23 years. I'm working for 24 years. Actually, that first year I earned money as well. But let's say, so that's 24 years. And in 24 years, I've actually, frankly, never had a private banker come my way and think I might be an opportunity. Now, maybe I'm not, because maybe I have invested it all already. But you see what I'm saying. Meanwhile, for a man, they would immediately come your way and say, here are your 500, investment options. Now, on the other hand, though, as you highlight, Maaike, what I notice is, again, that social media is filling those advertisement gaps. So I would think for your type of clients, it better be on notice, because for me, a lot of my day-to-day purchases actually are now based, and specifically in the health category, this exact category you mentioned, are now based on push advertisements on Facebook, and not because they come with a push, is because you can then see all the comments, you can easily see if there is a rant about this thing not working. I rather do that now than to go, frankly, to the Watsons and not know if that same type of product with similar or different composition works or not. So I think everybody got to be on notice that whatever gaps are left by former unautomated incumbents will be filled for sure, and are being filled.
I think there's a risk in that as well, though, in that the influencer marketing and advertising industry is unregulated. And social media, as yet, done an exceptionally good job at staying unregulated. And one of the most powerful forces in helping to put parameters around advertising industry, especially if you think about, say, advertising to kids, which is very important in this context, there are strict regulations, and companies have to stick to those. And when we move into the areas of influencers being able to really do whatever they want and not be very visible because they're doing it behind security restrictions on Facebook, I think you can get in some really dangerous areas there. And I think there's some great examples of influencers being able to do brilliant stuff. There's some equally really hideous examples of 14, 15, 16-year-old female influencers doing really bad things and not being visible and not being regulated in them. And I think there's a massive risk, I think, that the advertising industry is shifting into unregulated spaces, and that is tricky too.
I think for body image, it's certainly a huge issue. I agree with you. Yeah, it's a huge issue because but then that said, it was an issue before, as you said.
Yeah.
It's just, everything on social media is amplified. Correct. So you get a lot of that amplification. And for those who want to amplify all this odd stuff, they have a forum now, whereas in the past they would need to go through to someone like you to appear on the billboard, and they wouldn't, obviously. Yeah. Okay, so Lena, I think you mentioned the latest McKinsey report, right? Which kind of elaborated on the difference between female and male leadership. So I would like to get your thoughts on this, including, again, from the perspective of the women that come your way, what they tell you, how they reintegrate in the workforce, etc., and what you've learned from them.
I think there are lots of things to talk about when it comes to like COVID in the past 20 months. But there's really one good thing about COVID is that all the men are forced to stay at home as well, and realizing that, how is it to deal with the kids when they're having homeschooling. And I think to a lot of us, including senior leadership at a corporate, realize that all of us have a family or have a life beyond just the work. So that also bring another perspectives of, I think in the past 20 months, have this rising trend of seeing how female leadership would be perhaps could be a better form of leadership because of the, if I may just stereotype, the kind of style women tends to bring when they run a company compared to their male counterparts, of being more concerned about the well-being of their employees, which during COVID and this challenging time, it would be very important because everyone, including those who don't have kids, would have a lot of issues that they have to deal with back home. So none of us would be coming to work 100% devoted at work. And so I think that also, as quite a good alert to many senior management, realizing that despite whether or not there will be a quota in place, there should be a need to have more diversity at the leadership level. So I think, of course, that's another big debate to have when it comes to quota, but personally, I think it might also help to change the scenery if we can have more female participations at the senior level and in the government or in any corporate. I think, having said that, I think the one good thing about COVID is that, it's kind of have us all slow down and kind of revisit all the issues around us, and so that's why I think a large part of the McKinsey report this year also addressed that issues, and which we have senior leadership here, female senior leadership at the company, and I don't know whether you agree to that, like when it comes to managing the company as a female.
Yeah, it's interesting because I also read the report, and it's very interesting to see that the report mentions that the amount of women that have burned out is kind of at record highs, and part of it is obviously because of the additional workload, and twice more likely, or in certain countries like China and India, actually 9 to 10 times more likely of having to take care of all the household responsibilities. But then also the reality is that the report also mentions that women are much more involved in D&I, are much more involved in allyship, and much more involved in mentorship and sponsorship, and are much more, I would say, compassionate, have been compassionate leaders during COVID, so tend to take on a much larger emotional burden. And to be honest, I can't really say whether that's correct or not, because I think I haven't been privy to other corporates, but I have felt over the last 2 years the kind of ability to always be on and always checking in with people, not just during COVID, but also during the protests. It's been an incredibly stressful time for Hong Kong as a whole. And as a manager, really spending a lot of time with people and spending time to listen to them and taking the time to try and support them in all kind of different ways, because this is also a little bit uncharted territory. So to continuously come up with new ideas and new things has been, even for somebody like me who generally has a quite high energy level, I've also had my moments where I thought, oh God, this is really tough. So I understand that in COVID times, this must have been across the world for everybody very stressful, but I can imagine that it has been a lot tougher for women.
So when we look at the countries, I think that have lesser infections or places, it seems like there is maybe a connection to women leadership. But you could also turn that around, because it could easily link to risk aversion, right? So, for example, I mean, in Hong Kong we have a zero tolerance. Zero tolerance is de facto zero risk tolerance, right? That's what it is. And I think the same is happening in New Zealand, and it does come at a very significant social cost as well. And I would say specifically for anybody who is actually an expat with family offshore, like myself. To be frank, I haven't seen my elderly parents now for leading up to 2 years, and I can't even start to plan for Christmas, because we might be hit again with some change in rules. So I definitely think, let's say, the link to female and caring is seen, as you said, maybe not just in the companies, but maybe on country level. But at the same time, maybe it's important as well that caring does not amount to zero risk acceptance, because zero risk acceptance, as you know, in business is also not a way to do business. Business comes actually with risk, which is always one of the reasons why people have thought that there is more men on the top of the pyramid, because they're more willing to continue heading through that risk scenario. But anyway, leaving the thoughts of COVID aside for a moment. So, Maaike, the you mentioned burnout in the context of COVID, but I sometimes wonder if women burn out earlier in their careers. And this also is, again, supported by the McKinsey research, but the McKinsey research, I would say, even of a few years back, you will see that above 50, there's actually very few women still around in the workforce. So I've been, doing some self-reflection and trying to apply that to my scenario and try and understand why would that be happening? And to be frank, I came to a rather simple answer, right? So maybe it's simple, maybe it's not that simple, right? But as far as I can tell, most women now that are building careers actually push having children to their 30s. So I was probably a really early example of that. I had no desire to have the kids until I was 35. So, but I would say a lot of women are now pushing it to 30s. Inversely, 40, 50 years ago, early 20s was the norm. Now we're talking 30s, maybe 35, and maybe even above 35 becoming the norm. And in my personal scenario, I can say I had my first child right as I needed to be promoted to MDship. So actually, I did not get promoted to MDship. And I had to make a detour by joining another company that gave me MDship. So, I would say that was a hugely difficult decision for me. I had actually reached my threshold, which is 35, and I knew I had to get going in the kids category or maybe risk infertility, because infertility goes up very significantly over 35. So I decided, look, I'm going to have to give up on this MDship and just get the child. And then later, of course, not having given up on the MDship, I then switched jobs to get the MDship anyway. But then comes the time where you go look, I have now one son. I think he better has a sister or brother to learn how hard life is, right? And to fight a little bit. So then you need to make the second child. So now look at this. By 35, I'm actually executive director on the cusp of MD, but not yet MD. And then I spent actually, 1 year pregnant, 1 year unwound, 2 years wait, 1 year pregnant, 1 year unwound. Now you're already actually towards going to the 45s, right? So then it gets even more interesting, because then you start looking up on the internet, and then there's perimenopause, which starts literally around that age. And then I haven't figured it out yet, but seems to continue up to 54, something like that, when you actually hit menopause. So I didn't even know, frankly, what perimenopause was. So I looked it up, and it is the stage where there is significant hormonal change. However, you have not hit menopause, which is defined as a full stop of cycles. So if I add all of this up, to be frank, it's like swimming against the current, right? It's not just swimming against the current for promotion and for doing the best possible job. It's really swimming against the current, on both a personal level and a work level, and that frankly makes it twice as hard. So maybe I wanted to ask each of you, frankly, a follow-up question on that. So, Adrian, you mentioned specifically this example of being upset about your wife's situation when you tried to adopt. Could you give a little bit more detail about that? What upset you? Because I can tell you, as a woman, we have to face it every day. Yeah. So what as a bystander in that sense, man, upset you the most?
So, the first thing was just that there are, as with anything, there are just biases in this process. People are used to a particular set of things happening, and the thing that they're used to happening in adoption processes here in Hong Kong, and I suspect in most places, is that there'll be a working father and a mother that's decided not to work, and statistically that's true. But it was just an assumption. So from the first meeting, it was someone looking at my wife and saying, and of course you'll have to give up work, without checking who was the main wage earner. So it's just an assumption. But there is actually a point-scoring algorithm for adoption that states that you're more likely to adopt if it's the mum that's not working rather than the father. So had we been able to decide that Tamsin would be the main wage earner, we would have been less likely to be chosen for adoption with me being the primary carer.
That's really
now,
shocking.
that is by the way, there are lots and lots of reasons why you can statistically argue that that's the right thing for the kids. You can make that argument in a pretty powerful way. And this is why I would not blame social services or claim that they're wrong. They're probably right. But the world needs changing so that social services can change that rule. It's not their fault. It's the world's fault. But, that was pretty galling and annoying. So even if we'd had the choice, obviously we would have chosen for Towns to stop working. And then I think the thing that's frustrating for us now, and I think it is worse here in Hong Kong than it would be if we were at home. We're from London in the UK. Is there is less. There are a few options here for a non-linear career. You have a career path, you're going up a trajectory, you stop and have kids, and your trajectory is suddenly slowing, and then you're on a different path, and it's quite difficult, and you're floating in this upwards ladder that's no longer quite such an upwards ladder, it's more a snakes and ladders kind of game that's a bit confusing. There is a linear path, and if you break from that linear path, there isn't a design for how to use you anymore. There isn't a way of saying, well, she represents excellent value in this way, let's find a different way of working with her. There's a full-time job or there's not. So we don't have that non-linear career flexibility to provide more options. The thing that bothers me, by the way, about that is the sort of lack of fairness in it. The reason why I stay involved with this and don't get depressed is because I genuinely think that this whole debate is about creating a better human experience where we'll all have nicer choices. I would love to be able to work less. Please don't tell my boss. I would love to be able to work a lot less and have more choices, but in our current setup, that's not going to happen. If we had more acceptance of non-linear careers, more choices of how couples can generate earnings for themselves and work flexibly on and off over time, have period breaks, take some time off if you're going through perimenopause, take some time off if you're having a kid or not, and for the mother and father or for primary care or secondary care, then it would be great. We don't have that optionality. And so that's what bugs me about it.
Yeah, but on the other hand, if as a woman we needed to take time off for that, we would be out of
but Bénédicte, I appreciate your theory, but I do think the real problem is that, as bringing it back to corporate life, is that we as organizations, to Adrian's point, are just not set up to deal with all people's different preferences. Because, just like women have challenges, LGBTQI people have the same kind of challenges. So I think what is really important is to start focusing on what inclusion looks like. So how can we create an environment where everybody can come to work, firstly as they are, but also, kind of have like personalized circumstances. And that means that for women, there's research that shows there are significant kind of moments in their life that they have to deal with, whether it's having children or adopting or having IVF or going through menopause, whatever it is. But make sure that we have the right policies and right arrangements to kind of deal with this. And this goes from healthcare benefits to internal parental policies to basically giving the employee the flexibility around how to choose to work. And that even means that people that don't like to start work early are given the opportunity to start early or work from home or work from a Starbucks. And I think that's why we are seeing so many women stepping out of the workforce, because there is not that lack of flexibility, and they decide to become an entrepreneur because that at least gives them the flexibility to kind of decide how to work. It's a real challenge for organizations to become this inclusive, because we are conditioned through bias and through all kind of cultural differences and sensitivities and rules and regulations to kind of think in one way. I think there is some slow improvement in this, and I think particularly some of the younger companies and startups do this much better. When you talk to them about working from home and building a culture, they're like, yeah, but we only work remote, so we don't even have an office. So I think there is hope about this more kind of individualized services. There are insurances that you can now sign up to which are personalized for you, because you might have different challenges than I have than Lena has. And I think that flexibility is what we need to start working on as organizations, as societies, as communities.
I agree. I think there's a chunk of it that comes down to a capitalist system that's slightly at odds with our desire to be better humans, which we're still wrestling with. But I think we're making progress on it. Like if in a in listed companies, in the world of listed companies, if your focus has to be value to shareholders and on a quarterly basis, it's very hard to do a lot of these things. But there's already lots of discussion, if not some actual progress, towards measuring value, not just in shareholder returns, but in human value as well. And I think certainly, you were talking about the sort of younger kids that are coming up these days, learning everything from social media and having a different view on life. I think that generation, as they come into management, will see things very differently than we do now. Yeah. I hope.
Okay, well, I have a lot of questions here from the audience, so I'm going to kind of go one by one, and I'd say we limit our answer to a minute and a half. So first, to start first with you, Lena. So someone asked, anonymous asked, with the COVID pandemic, do you think it has made it more difficult for women in the workforce? And if so, do you have any tips for them?
I think, going back to the point that I think, interestingly, I'm quite blessed to be a woman. I think we're trained quite differently because of the physical challenge that we have every month since we're a teenager. So we actually have, to certain respect, build some better resilience compared to the male counterpart. No offense, but I think I gave birth to two children, natural birth, and I think it's also proved that I'm stronger in that sense as a woman. And I think the questions about whether COVID would give us a more challenging time certainly has given challenging time to everyone, and the fact that women tends to be having more responsibility back home would just add that extra burden. But like I said, I think during COVID, all the men, all the male counterparts also realize, the kind of challenges that we have. And personally, I see my husband picking up more responsibility at home because of that. So I wouldn't necessarily say there's a definite yes, but in terms of tips, I would say just delegate more to your spouse if possible. I mean, the truth that women tends to hang on to and to our responsibility, and I think we just have to let go a little bit more. Yeah.
So I have a bit of a follow-up challenge question to this, because the other advantage I can see that COVID has brought is, in fact, this flexible working has been pushed onto society and onto any employers who wanted everybody to be sitting at their desk. It's now been pushed onto them that these people weren't at their desk, and we've all had to learn Zoom, Teams, WebEx, etc. We're kind of used, frankly, to be remote from each other now. It's not just the startups, it's literally the whole of finance. So my follow-up question for you, Lena, is what I notice is that, of course, and not surprisingly, women are quite happy in that home working environment. But now employers are starting to push as many as possible back to the office. Maybe not every employer, Maaike, but a lot of employers are. So what would you recommend? Would you recommend that a woman take on this conversation direct and just explain to their boss that they feel because some of them will clearly say they feel they could get a lot more done by being at home and by not being interrupted, for example. So how do you suggest them to brace that conversation if they really felt that COVID, oddly enough, offered them a better balance?
I think if you ask, I'm talking about the general public. Of course, if you're at the senior leadership, I suppose you have a bit bigger apartment and more space at home. But if you ask an average citizen in Hong Kong if they would want to work from home, a lot of them would tell you they probably wouldn't want to work from home because of the limited space at home. They would rather have the flexibilities. I think there's a difference between work from home policy and versus like flexibilities. I think if you ask any average employees, they would rather have the flexibility and, of course, the trust from the employer to be able to go in and out of the office as needed, and be able to be at home when they're needed and still being productive. I also notice a lot of companies, especially the younger startup companies, they would be more open to that concept, and they would never, one of them, for example, the big social media company, were sharing with me that they would never need to introduce any sort of returnship program for their talent, because they have always been providing flexibilities. So to them, it doesn't matter. Someone doesn't have to be there, even before COVID time, and they trust their employees, and so they could take time off as needed as long as they get the work done. But I can understand, a lot of companies, especially the more old-fashioned company, might not be able to accept that. But I think COVID has given a lot of opportunity for those companies to also realize that it is possible. If there are any corporate or senior management there, I would urge them, you give flexibilities rather than this like work from home policy, because frankly speaking, I wouldn't want to have four device, Zooming at the same time with my 2 young kids during the start of COVID. Because we have a small apartment. Anyway, so I think, like I said, I think COVID actually has given us a lot of problem, but then it's also given us a lot of opportunity.
Well, I can give us an example. I worked from home yesterday, and it was simply to save the 2 hours commute, because I had to edit a 90-page report, and I had exactly 1 day until midnight. So, I wasn't going to take those 2 hours, and I decided to do it from home. And on another week, I decided to work from home because I didn't have a lot of meetings. And then I realized what I do when I work from home is that I actually do go for exercise, be it at 8 p.m. But the fact is, with my 2-hour commute, if I'm in the office, I even miss an 8 p.m. exercise slot. So, these are other forms of balance I'm kind of expressing. But it is, and then the third category is the woman who literally says, I can concentrate because I'm not being interrupted in chats with everybody all the time.
Yeah, but again, I do think this is very personal, because I'm not seeing all the women at home and all the men in the office, to be honest. So I've been doing a bit of conversations around this topic in particular, and I think what the people appreciate most is actually the fact that there is now optionality and flexibility. So there's more choice about working from home or working from the office. A lot of people appreciate the fact that they actually now have a family breakfast and don't have to leave early because of the commute, and are actually spending more quality time together. I think a lot of them are also experiencing what it's like to share your workspace and your home space with your partner, and what kind of implications that has. And a lot of them are actually quite pleasantly surprised about how that co-working at home actually is also working positively. But on the other hand, there's also a whole group of people, to your point, that is quite happy to come to the office because their space is small and it's crowded. So I think the thing is, again, coming back to providing optionality and giving flexibility to your employees. And we are working in a hybrid model, and so far that's actually going quite well.
I think that's just I totally agree with that, and I think the optionality is really the key. I think there's a counter argument just for the fun of it. And by the way, I'm totally pro flexible working, and I'm very happy working from home. But an interesting counter argument to this in the very big picture. Very cool book called The War for Kindness, which is about the epidemic that we have of losing empathy through technology because we're not dealing with people on, as humans. Case in point, we're doing this through a camera instead of with an actual audience. Human interaction and the role of the office, massively important, and you don't know what you've got until you lose it. I think if you imagine a world in which we remove that, you remove a massive amount of non-verbal communication and human interaction, which helps breed empathy. And if we are in the business of gender equality, all forms of equality, about trying to bring about greater empathy, locking everyone away in their homes and having people deal with each other through screens too much could be a really dangerous thing. Yes. So it's definitely got to be about balance. There's absolutely a vital function in people coming together in teams and just being able to be together as a unit.
Well, we actually have kind of coined it the 3 C's. So it's around collaboration, connectivity, and community. And I've really realized that people are really enjoying the moments when we're back together and sharing and talking and really like that human connection. It's very, very important.
Okay, so switch topic a little bit. I have a question here, and I think it's for you, Adrian. So as a male who believes in having equal opportunities for women in the workplace, what can I do to be a better ally?
So the motto, one of the mottos for male allies is just listen, learn, act. And I think that's the most important thing, really. None of us that are male allies are ever really going to be able to fully understand the issue that we're dealing with. That's just the nature of being a man. You're only going to be able to understand it from a male perspective. All of us work in businesses where we can affect things, but not necessarily change and fix everything. So I think it is coming into it recognizing that with a good deal of humility, that you actually, the best you can do is learn and listen. And I think, I say this jokingly and facetiously, but I think when you become a male ally, one way of looking at it is that you're essentially a recovering sexist. It's about slightly improving some things that you can do, rather than thinking, right, I'm here to fix everything. What the best advice I got when I started off from, it was Sume Thompson and now Fiona Knott at Women's Foundation, is just starting off with introspection and looking at the different circles of influence that you've got. So there's looking at you and your own behaviors and how you are. What are the things that you can do differently? So, for instance, I found that I would generally naturally tend to talk more to extroverts in the office, which meant that I was talking a lot less to some of the women in the office who were quieter because they were in a minority. So that was something I hadn't noticed I was doing until I was sort of reflecting on my own behavior. So you're looking at that first circle, which is myself. Then you're looking at family and friends. So it's not all about going off and trying to change maternity policies in your office. It's really not. It's actually about looking at how you behave with your friends and family as well. So starting to call out your mates when they make a stupid joke at the weekend. Starting to ask the right questions about why we haven't invited X, Y, and Z person. Whether it's appropriate that we have blokes' nights where we go and, eat a curry all together. Yes, probably, but is the conversation going to be great? Who knows? So sort of dealing with that friends and family bit. Then it's, your workplace, which is your immediate management, your immediate sphere of influence within the business. And then, if you're confident and want to do it, advocating externally and going and trying to sort of talk to audiences like this. But I think if you can start off just with those circles of influence, then it makes it a bit more manageable, because it is mind-bogglingly difficult to know where to kind of step into this. And it's so easy for you as a male ally to just say stupid things, make mistakes, get things wrong. And I think you kind of just have to be comfortable with that. You're going to get it wrong. And therefore finding a sort of safe space and some people that can help guide you. Reverse mentoring, by the way, is another thing that was immensely helpful to me. Being able to have someone who you can trust, who is a woman who can say, no, that's an idiot thing to say, don't put it like this, or I'm glad you asked me that, please don't ask anyone else ever again. Having someone who is a friend who can help you through dealing with some of the tricky bits is really important.
So I have a linked question about where to find mentors, and I'll just quickly answer this one because we have some others as well. So on the mentorship side, both the Women's Foundation as well as Women in Finance Asia have mentorship programs where you get matched with people from outside your organization. However, personally, I always think do not ignore the mentors within your organization. So if you look for a mentor in your organization, approach HR. And if you're looking for a mentor outside your organization, then look through one of the existing programs. And as said, Women's Foundation and Women in Finance Asia each have such a mentor program. Okay, another question that I saw in here is a question around tokenism. So people continue being worried about this topic of tokenism by introducing gender quota. Personally, I've never been worried about it. I think until the problem is corrected, towards the example of Alice at the beginning of this session, I mean, if it's not corrected, so many years on, you have 3 out of 20 in the Japanese cabinet, then in all respect is not corrected. So until it's corrected, I just think that this tokenism debate distracts from the issue that the issue is not corrected. But if anybody has another view about that, feel free to share.
So, be careful because it's full of landmines, this topic. My view, and this is more of a sort of professional view working in a business that focuses on helping companies try and change culture, is that whether quotas work or not, and by the way, they probably do in a lot of circumstances, ultimately you're not fixing the problem unless you change culture. And I would be less worried about tokenism, but say, I'm with you, I think it's a nonsense argument. However, I do think that actually quotas can have, if not managed properly, quotas allow people off the hook. They allow a group of people in management to say, well, we wanted to get 2 people in, tick, tick, we've done it, boom, now we don't need to do anything. That doesn't actually change the culture of your business or make you more gender equal, you've just ticked a box. And I think the danger of that tokenism is, the danger of quotas is that it does give an out to those that want to work their way around the system rather than actually addressing cultural change. That said, I've come to the point of view over the years that I think there are many instances where you have to have quotas just as a circuit breaker, because if something doesn't force the start of change, then you just get this constant intransigence. So I'm kind of on the fence on it, but I do think changing culture is you've got to have a plan to change culture. If you're going to subscribe to having quotas, great, do it, but you've also got to have a plan to change culture behind the scenes as well.
Yeah, and if I just can comment on that, I totally agree with Adrian. I think the quota are important, but it kind of needs to be, what else are you doing? So I think, are you actually tracking progress? Are you holding leaders accountable? Are you communicated about it? And it was interesting because I was on a panel the other day about investing in diversity really as an investment. And unfortunately, I think we were making quite good strides, but now from an investment perspective, actually climate change and ESG has taken over, which is fine because that's also very important. But I do think kind of forcing companies to come up with the right strategies around this is probably something that kind of comes as a package together with quotas, because to Adrian's point, otherwise it's not going to work.
I completely agree with that. So one question for Lena, and then maybe I finish with one for you, Maaike. So there's one question that has 2 votes. So it's asking, and I would say, Lena, are you seeing organizations looking at job sharing as a way to help men and women balance work-life better? I mean, any one of you can answer, maybe from Visa and Edelman standpoint, if you have job shares. Maybe Lena first.
Yeah, it's also something that personally I've been trying to see if there are example of job sharing in Hong Kong, and it seems like it's definitely not that popular yet. And even in the UK, I think it's more of the public sector who are more open to this. And I think for a lot of these new initiatives, oftentimes we might need the government to be the first one doing it. Unfortunately, I don't think our government is doing it yet. But I do agree it's just another form for both men and women to really have the flexibilities. But of course, it requires a lot of trust and communications to have it going. I don't know if you have seen any example of job sharing in Hong Kong. I haven't.
I managed one 14 years ago. but actually, you need the people to really want to work together. So in fact, my answer to job sharing is 2 need to come forward, and then it's imminently feasible. In my case, 2 came forward. They both had a child, and they said, look, I'm sitting with this one in my office, and we have agreed we can't do these 2 jobs, but we're willing to share 1 job. And it was completely feasible. They both had the same background. They were lawyers. So they shared 2.5 days. One did the legal work and the other 2.5 days the other. But again, if you're waiting for that one opportunity to do a job share, it's better just get your friend, and specifically maybe that's a recommendation for the people who come consult you. Find somebody you can do that job share with. That's for sure the best. Yeah.
But I don't think that it's very common across Asia. It's very common in Europe. And I'm from the Netherlands, and it's very, very popular. So they would share 1 job. People would do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the other Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, use Wednesday as a handover day. Very, very popular. But also a 4-day work week is also very popular, or a 36-hour work week. So I think there's a lot to be learned from that, so kind of the good and the bad. Because I think we just talked earlier also about the flex work. The downside of flex work, obviously, is that there's a lack of boundaries between personal life and work-life balance. So there's probably something to be said around productivity, and that's where I think data and kind of sharing more information about this could work. But I don't see this very widely adopted across Asia Pacific. Probably the most progressive is in Australia. In that space, I used to work for a very progressive Australian bank, and I'd say they are ahead of the curve in that space, but I haven't seen it in Hong Kong.
Good. Well, we're hitting right on time, and in fact, the last question was what the government can do under the ESG and the D&I agenda. So I think if anybody from government was watching, I think there were some thoughts expressed during the course of this panel. So with this, I think we are probably just closing the event right on time.
Wow, what a great discussion. I've been sitting here watching and learning quite a bit, and really want to thank all four of you. Thank you, Bénédicte, Maaike, Lena, and Adrian. I am just so impressed, and I know we're going to continue this discussion. When you guys were speaking, that reminded me of somebody that I knew in New York about 20 years ago, an Asian American executive who was challenging the lack of DEI in U.S. corporate workplace. His complaint was there was lack of Asian Americans in the hierarchy. And one of the questions he asked the U.S. corporate executives, so what would baseball be like without Jackie Robinson? And since sports, a lot of the CEOs and senior executives know what sports is like, I thought his question was very relevant then. And it's also very relevant now in this talk about women leaders. And I think we also touch about LGBTQ in the talk about DEI. And I guess the question I have now is, what would the sports be like? What would tennis be like without the Williams sisters? What would golf be like without Tiger Woods? And these are all questions that I think we need to pose to the corporates as well as government. Maybe they're underutilized. We're talking about economics. You maybe are missing part of the, without the full participation of women in the workplace. So those are the things that I wanted to add. And again, I want to thank, our partners in this program. And I look forward to further discussion because, again, this is not going anywhere and we need to keep an eye on the ball so that my niece and Lena's children will live in a different world where I think women are more empowered than they are right now. So again, thank you all, and thank all of you for joining us on this wonderful chat. And we look forward to welcome all of you back in future programs, regardless of where we are. We can be in quarantine. We can still be participating in programs like this. So again, thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.